Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Vanderpump Rules Spotlight panel. My name is Joaquin Elizondo, and I am the host of the Hollywood Editing Mentor podcast. And I'm very excited to speak with the Emmy-nominated editors on the project. Let me introduce you to our panelists. We have Paul Peltekian.
Hey, how are you guys? Thanks for having us.
Ramin Mortazavi.
Hi there. Good to be here.
Sax Eno.
Hello, everybody. Very excited about this.
And Jesse Friedman.
Hi, how's it going? Nice to be here.
Well, happy to have you all here. And this is an open panel discussion to talk about your work on Vanderpump Rules. So feel free to jump in at any time. But let's start it off by talking about how each of you got your start as editors. Again, just feel free to chime in at any moment, but just to kick it off here, maybe start with Paul. Paul, how did you get your start as an editor?
Yeah, you want the long or the short? Yeah, I started messing around, in my early days, like middle school. Every project in school was a video site. Like we would be like, can we, instead of this book report, can we do a video on it instead? And that was literally it through high school. And then by the time I was able to work at 16, I somehow got a job doing local government access productions, like council meetings and PSAs and whatever it was that needed to be done. I'd pick up a camera and then edit it, and it would make it on the local government channel. And so that was like an extreme amount of education for me early on, and that basically took me through college. And among other things, I've always been freelance. And among other things, like I ended up getting a phone call from a friend who I actually went to school with, who was an assistant editor. And he's like, my buddy, Post Super needs another AE on the show. Can you do it? And I was like, yeah, of course I can do it. What's it on? He's like, it's on Avid. And this is like early 2000s. I'm like, I know Avid. I can do it. I didn't know Avid. And so I crammed really hard and I learned. And then like somehow like I nailed it. I got, I was on the show and that producer or the post supervisor, brought me on to another show at Evolution, which produces Vanderpump Rules, but this was in the early 2000s. And I did a show there called Bands Reunited, and it was just kind of like uphill from there. I met so many people just on that show who ended up taking me to Next Entertainment that does The Bachelor and a bunch of other shows. And so it was just one after the other. Started editing right away in reality TV after that. And it's just been an uphill ride ever since. And then in 2013, I guess, season 2 of Vanderpump Rules came on that and haven't left since. So yeah, that's the shortish answer.
That's great. Jesse.
Hi, yeah, I started editing probably back in high school. I went to an arts high school, went to film school, came out to Los Angeles in 2001. And fortunately, one of my first assistant editing jobs was on the behind the scenes DVDs for The Matrix Revolution, the 2 Matrix sequels. So I did for a long time, I did a lot of behind the scenes special feature work. And I was an assistant editor on the Matrix project for like a year and a half. And over the course of that period of time, it was a very small crew. Convinced them to let me start editing some of the special features. And then at the very end of the job, one of the editors that was on there got a night shift job that he didn't want to do. And I was like, I will take that. And so my first job was cutting night shift on a sports show. And that eventually led to me landing at Go Go Lucky, which was one of the kind of OG reality TV companies that did Laguna Beach. And I did this paranormal show for them and then ended up cutting Vanderpump Rules. Season 7 was my first season on. And I love it. Yeah.
Sax, let's hear from you.
Yes. I got interested in editing in high school. I had a teacher who used to work for ABC News, and he taught me all the mechanics of editing. I became kind of obsessed with editing. I followed that into college, and I had a producer from MTV's The Real World come out to our college and give a Q&A. And I went up to him after and I said, "Hey, can you make me an editor on The Real World?" Which was ridiculous because I was a student, and obviously he wasn't going to make me an editor, but he's like, "Well, I can get you an internship." And so I got an internship at The Real World, and eventually I was a dailies editor on a show called Love Cruise. And then eventually I just worked my way up to editor, and I got my first editor credit on Real World Vegas, and just been editing ever since.
Let's hear, Ramin.
Okay. Well, for me, it was my first experience with any kind of editorial machine was, and it was a machine. It wasn't a computer back then. It was at Pepperdine University. They had a local channel in Malibu, and we would, do some creative programming there. And so that's when I first got my hands on it. And a few years later, there was one of the assistant editors on an MTV show called Becoming was going on a vacation, and my brother, who had already been working there, said, "Hey, you want to step in as an assistant editor?" So I did for a week, and down the hall they were working on a pilot, and I befriended a production manager there, and he said, if the pilot gets picked up, I'll bring you on as an assistant editor. And that pilot got picked up. It was called Punked, and so I was on it for 3 seasons as their AE, and then again down the hall there was another pilot being worked at, and they gave me my their editor had wrapped, and they needed to deliver this thing over the weekend, and they brought me on even though I had zero experience editing. I was just all assistant editing, and again, that pilot got picked up, and they brought me on as an editor, and then I went back to Punked as an editor, and then that was it. So that's how I transitioned into editing.
It's awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I always like to hear how editors get their start, because it's always very interesting stories. It's not just one specific path, right?
Never, right?
But let's talk about now dive more into editing, and maybe tell us about your workflow on Vanderpump Rules, and what does an average day look like in the edit bay of this show?
Yeah. You guys want to jump in?
Start off?
Yeah.
I'll start. So basically, we get a scene that's been put together by our story editors and producers, and we discuss the scene, things to emphasize on, the point of the scene, where it goes, and the scope of the episode, and we discuss it, and then from there we kind of take it and cut it, trim it down, add music to it, sound effects, reaction shots, transitions, and all that to make it look pretty in. And and then we kind of move on to the next scene, and that workflow happens for several weeks until the episode is kind of put together. And then so that's basically the first month of a show.
Well, I mean, can you each tell us about, say, one of your favorite moments on the show?
Historically speaking, or something we've worked on?
Well, maybe, yeah, what you've worked on.
Go for it, Sax.
I mean, I have to say this season definitely would be the Ariana Tom breakup scene. It was like, it's very rare that you get to work with footage that's like that emotionally charged. And there was so much to work with. And, obviously we knew that we wanted it to feel like the audience was seeing everything, even though the conversation goes on for a couple hours and gets condensed down, you really want to feel like you saw the whole conversation. And so, yeah, it was fun to put together. It was intense. And that's one of my favorite moments, definitely from this season to work on.
I'll take the next one. I mean, as a fan of the show, I think definitely the last episode of the regular season with Tom Sandoval and Ariana. It was just so raw and so much emotion there. In terms of what I've worked on, I think I would have to go back to season 3, I think it was episode 1 or 2. It was my first scene ever that I ever cut for the show, and it was a fight. It was a physical fight between James Kennedy and Tom Sandoval. I think over Kristen at that time. So it was like, wow, this is amazing, and so yeah, I knew I was going to be in for a fun ride, and here I am, 8-9 seasons later. So.
I think this season, probably the favorite thing that I've done in my whole career was in my particular episode that I'd worked on. I had this section that was like a VHS tape, like rewinding and fast forwarding and kind of finding out this very specific storyline. And I was happy that had kind of landed on my plate, because I kind of had an idea of how to do it, and had like been driving myself crazy trying to figure out how to fit all of these. We had like maybe 5 full scenes that we had used, or that I'd used for that particular section. And there were only maybe like 30 or 40-second snippets that had the pieces that ended up actually in the cut. And so it was kind of trying to figure out, I was up at like 1:30 in the morning, trying to figure out how to put that together, and texted our boss, Natalie. And fortunately, she was cool with me attempting it, and it ended up working out pretty cool. And, but I will say that even though that's very like punch you in the face, kind of over the top editing, I feel like the work that was done in the season finale was unusual and amazing in the sense that there was a lot of space and a lot of time to breathe. And so like everybody that worked on that episode, I think sometimes you see editing, and the editing you notice is the editing that's kind of in your face like that. And the editing that was done on the final episode is beautiful, in the sense that a lot of the scenes are a lot less cutty than normal and a lot more air. And I feel like it's an amazing episode. Yeah.
No, yeah, I agree. Yeah, like, and to Jesse's point, like I think we're given a lot of freedom to be as creative as we want to be and really think outside the box. And we're allowed to try things without like, like being told it was wrong, or, you know what I mean? Like, we're allowed to push the envelope, and really look for, and that's what I love most. I can't like find a favorite moment on the show. Like, every season has like 100 amazing moments, because the cast brings it every single time, and so they give us enough comedy and enough drama to last a lifetime. And finding ways to accentuate the comedy for me is funny, whether it's like a graphic element or what, Jesse's talking about in terms of like how to tell that massive story using that technique. Sometimes you don't get to do that on other shows. They stick pretty hard to formats and styles and all that stuff, but we're given that ability to kind of like an accordion, let a show like episode 15 that Sax edited, let that play and breathe to let the drama happen. And then other shows, it's just, what are we going to do to punctuate this comedy? How are we going to, how are we going to build up this dramatic moment, or whatever it is? We can use whatever tools we want to use to make it interesting.
Well, talking about the process, and I know we mentioned a little bit about workflow, but on a project like this with multiple editors, what is the collaboration process like?
I mean, I would say it's very collaborative. It's collaborative with the other editors, and it's collaborative with the producers that we're working with. We're just constantly communicating about what we think the story is and where it's going and how the story's changing. And I mean, I think there were times, Ramin, where I called you up and said, "Hey, I've been working on this too long. Can you look at this for me for a second?" This show is so much fun to put together, and then I think we all had a really good time this season. So, yeah. it's very collaborative.
Yeah, and usually by the end of the season, most editors have kind of worked on most of the episodes altogether. So it is very collaborative, and we just try to do just help each other out and support each other, and at the best that we can. So we're constantly discussing it, even though last 3 years we've been working remotely. I think the communication really hasn't ended. We kind of talk about everything.
Well, I guess talking about collaboration, maybe this also applies to maybe finding, say, how do you determine the pacing of the show, especially when you're dealing with so many, storylines in a single episode?
I think that that is really like where the collaboration with our producers and our executive producers comes into play, because the show can't be done without them just as much as it can't be done without editors, right? They are the ones that are constantly tracking the story during production and bringing it back into post, and then continuing to track all our stories and figuring out where are these things going to play best. Is it going to be better in episode 2? Or do we need to shift things over to 3, or whatever it is? Like, how are we going to do this properly? So as editors, although we do discuss, maybe this scene would be better if we flipped it or whatever it is, at the end of the day, like, it's a much bigger discussion with the full season story arcs.
I think also the producers on this show, more than any other show I've ever worked on, have such an incredible knowledge of not just what's happening in a particular season, but in every season of Vanderpump Rules that's ever happened. So because this show's been on for 10 seasons, there's constant referencing to previous seasons. These people have been friends even before the show was on the air. And so there are, I would say, like savant level ability of several producers to recall a specific episode, act to the minute if we need a flashback. And definitely, like, piggybacking on what everybody else is saying, I think the collaboration between the producers and the editors is like we are all peers. There is no hierarchy as far as like creative decisions and things like that. I think we're always looking to each other to tell the story in the best way possible. And honestly, some of the best work that I think happens on the phone now, happens talking to our producers. I don't know that it's like just from like one single person sitting in front of a computer and figuring it out. It's a conversation. It's a constant conversation. And the last thing I'll add to that is that I think everybody on the show, that we are all fans of the show as well. And so we're all looking at it as like we're the first people to see, let's say, our episode or this season of Vanderpump Rules. And it's a lot of responsibility because we want to make a good show, not just for the fans, but we want to make a good show as fans ourselves that we feel is entertaining and funny and dramatic, and but is most importantly clear what story we're telling.
Well, I mean, how do you know, I guess, as an editor, how do you know when your work is done? Like when that's it, you nailed it, you nailed the story, is it, we got it?
When we wrap?
Yeah, when we wrap. Yeah, when the show starts airing, yeah, that's when you're like, yeah, that's done. We got to stop.
Never done. It's done when they take it away from you, pretty much.
Is there a moment though? Is there a certain feeling though? I guess when there is like something, you've achieved something, and you're like, all right, at least this we've got it. Or is it always a continuous like exploration, and literally it's like, all right, time is up?
And I really think it is just when it airs, that's when your job is done, because I mean there could be, not that it happens often, but there are times where even you have to make these last minute changes, and so until it airs, that's when your job is done. And especially if you're following social media and any kind of reading people's reactions, and depending on how that is, that's basically the gratification part.
I mean, I think also I was trying to do the math in my head, but I think we ultimately have, let's say for like last season, like over 1,000 hours of footage and down to 15 hours of television, and always reassessing what's in the raw, because maybe on one day a piece of information doesn't matter, and then a week later or 2 weeks later, all of a sudden it's important. But certainly when we get down to like cutting the last minute or 2 minutes out of a show, that can be the most challenging part, because you're trying to still tell the same story, but not feel the edits and feel the places where you're lifting, hopefully small little pieces that nobody will miss. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, the audience, I guess, never knows what was in there before, but I think it's our job to make sure that like we're still telling the exact same story that we set out to, in spite of, let's say, I don't know, at the very end of the process, pulling an extra 20, 10 or whatever, 10 frames out of the show that nobody feels that it's extra cutty or anything like that. Yeah.
Well, a lot of people like to hear like tips and tricks like from editors. Can you discuss the editing techniques used to create a cohesive narrative from the raw footage?
Well, I think everybody does it differently. My process is going to be vastly different than the rest of the guys. I'm kind of all over the place, and it probably shows early on. But it's like sometimes I'll be working on one scene, and then it's just like writing or painting or whatever, creating anything artistic, right? You kind of hit a roadblock, and then you're like, I need to kind of like step away from this thing because I feel like I've done all I can for now on this, and I might jump to the end of the show if that scene is ready for me. I might go to the end of the show and like do something in Act 6, and then I might go back and do something in Act 3. But overall, it's like for me, it's just cut it as quick as possible. Don't think too hard, because the moment I start thinking too deep into something, then I get lost in the process. And for me personally, it's like I love finding that music track that's going to kick off that act or that scene or whatever it is. For whatever reason, for me, it just like it kind of jumpstarts the tone of what's going to come after it. So that's how I kind of attack it. And every season, I always seem to be like, I'm going to try editing this show a different way, and then I always fall into the same personal traps of how I do it.
I think with music is definitely something that affects pacing and so many things. And so what I usually try to do is cut all the scenes together, put it, and then score it last, because it gives every episode has this different feel, and so putting music to it last will definitely help me with the flow of the entire episode, not only from scene to scene, but just from episode, the entire episode. And also a lot of things that I like to do is watch raw footage and find moments that could be connective tissues, from one scene to the next, or with the overall arch of the stories and the episodes. And it could be as simple as somebody's name or just a single line, but sometimes you can find these little golden moments that in the scene it might not be that important, but you might need it to kind of transition into something else.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that I feel like different editors have different strengths. Some editors are great at comedy, some are great at drama, but I feel like on Vanderpump Rules you kind of have to be good at everything, because in any episode you could have a comedy scene followed by a dramatic scene followed by a fight followed by B-roll montage. So I do think there's a lot of techniques that come into it. I agree with Paul and Ramin about the music, and trying to use music is kind of more the like emotional narrator on this show. So sometimes like the audience will know something that the characters don't know, and we kind of use music to tell that. Or you'll have a scene that has two people with two completely different agendas, and again, that's something we can do with music, is kind of tell the audience what's going on. So yeah, there's a lot of techniques, but I think sometimes music is the most powerful, because a lot of the audience may not even realize what's going on, and yet they're kind of influenced by it. So yeah.
I would say I definitely also try to not score anything until the absolute last possible moment, mainly because we're constantly, tightening or shifting things around. And I don't want to have my music constantly blown up. That being said, I will say that, like, to Sax's point, like, I think we do all have strengths. I would say I'm cutting montages, which are like a kind of, hallmark of all Bravo shows, is like probably my least favorite thing to do. So I usually wait until the very last second to like cut any of my montages. One thing I will say that is definitely like part of my workflow though, is that I'm like almost OCD about how my cut sounds before it goes out to the network. I truly feel that if, let's say, a producer or an executive can't hear a line of dialogue, that they may miss a specific story beat. So I'm constantly dipping music down, making sure the level of the dialogue is absolutely as clear as possible, even EQing or doing whatever I can to, we're not the mixers on the show, but I do feel like the people that watch the episode at every single point have to see it and experience it in a way that they're going to understand the story. And if it's not clear, then that may come back to us as a note. And I'm always, trying to make sure that not just that the story is clear in the episode, but that in the actual dialogue that you're hearing it as clearly as possible.
Well, thanks for sharing some insight into your process. I mean, always very interesting to hear how everyone works. It's just kind of like how each of you got your start, right? Everyone's different. So I'd like to hear about that. And again, thank you for being here, on the show and giving us, a look at the editing of Vanderpump Rules. To kind of finish things off here, what advice would you give to first-time editors? People who are listening here and are watching and want to do what you do. Some advice for them, and say with regards to soft skills, maybe like stuff like networking, and also that on the technical side, the harder skills, right? Maybe like what software do you recommend, or even what content do you recommend that they watch?
Well, I would say definitely most TV shows and movies are edited on Avid. So if you can learn an editing software, I would say Avid would be the best one to use. And as far as advice, I feel like if you are working on a show that already has an editor, I would go up to that editor and ask them if you can cut scenes for them in your spare time, and then get feedback on those scenes. And that kind of feedback is going to be like the best kind of education that you can get. And they may end up liking what you do, and they might put it on the air. So it's a cool way to learn stuff. But also, I think advice for any editor is like, I'm a big fan of the term "cut with your gut." It's really important to stay in touch with your instincts, especially when you're watching footage for the first time. So I would just remind people to trust your instincts, and whether you're sending a cut out to the network for the first time, or watching footage, or trying to solve some kind of problem in the edit. It's easy to get away from that, but I would say trust your instincts.
Yeah, I would, my advice would be just, to learn the two leading softwares, which is, Media Composer and Premiere. And just in addition to that, just learn as many softwares as you can, whether it's Photoshop to tweak images, or After Effects to create any kind of motion effect. Just learn as many softwares as you can. Cut everything, short form, long form. If you don't have access to somebody else's footage, then cut your own. Anything that's personal that either you can go out and shoot, or family videos, whatever it might be. Just start editing, and just get a feel for everything. And definitely music. Put music to everything. That just helps with it all. But yeah, number one is just learn the softwares out there. The more you know, the more marketable you are.
Yeah, there's really no excuse anymore, right? Avids aren't $100,000 anymore, right? You can download it, get a subscription using your student ID. Now you can get it for a discount, right? All of them. So learn everything, and go out there and just shoot as much as you can so that you can edit your footage. And like if you don't have any access to other people's stuff to edit, just do your own. There's just no excuse, and there's so many platforms to put your stuff on. And it's just a new way of also getting discovered, right? Like get out there, edit as much as you can, and that's it. And yeah, trust your gut, like Zach said. That's really what it comes down to. There are some basic rules as we obviously know in editing, but outside of that, it's do what feels right, and keep learning.
I'll go like a slightly different direction. I mean, as this is an editing podcast, I feel like I can get a little nerdy with it. I think I've been cutting for like 20 years. I've always felt like I'm trying to, I don't know if becoming one with the machine is the correct term, but I'm always trying to take as many steps as possible out of the process to make it as easy for me to get what's in my head on the computer. And so what that means, I guess, in practice is that for a while at the end of every job that I would do, I would look at my keyboard layout and see, is there any way that I can reposition specific keys or learn new features that I haven't been using that can make me faster at it? So whereas I used to use like on Media Composer, like the audio dissolve with the dialogue window, I learned about like head fade and tail fade. And that took like 3, 4, 5 seconds off of my dissolves every single time I did that. You add that up over the course of a day, you're then, maybe getting work done 5 minutes faster or 10 minutes faster. Another thing that I use a software called Keyboard Maestro, which is like a macro program. And I'm able to string 3, 4, 5 different keyboard shortcuts together in one to be able to do things that take much, much longer to do. I've even set up like my music audition window. I had used Premiere once or for one project, and I loved the music audition, the way they have it set up in there so much, and Media Composer wasn't able to do that. So I was able to set up keyboard shortcuts so that like you press a button, it ping pongs over to the source window, it automatically starts playing, it goes back to the window, and then I can go up and down in there. So just every time that you're moving your mouse from one screen to the other screen and you're slowing yourself down, I'm always trying to figure out a way to like get faster. Not because, I mean, it is important to be fast. That is absolutely a fact. But it's more about being able to get what's in my head into the project as fast as I can. And so I'm always like, I know it's tough to like relearn a new keyboard command or something like that. But if you can practice it and get faster at it, it's always going to be worth it. Yeah.
I'll piggyback on what you said. I use, instead of Keyboard Maestro, I use the Stream Deck. But yeah, I do the same thing. It's like, for me, like the most time consuming thing is finding music. I think everybody would probably agree with that, because we have 5 or 6 libraries of music with thousands of cues over hundreds of bins. And the process of like double clicking a music clip, playing it, or sometimes another editor has used it and left the cursor like midway, so then you have to hit home, then you hit play, and then sometimes the beginning's not great, so you have to go, JKL it faster, right? And then you play it, and then so there's a process there, and then sometimes like when something takes too long, you get out of it, right? Like mentally, you're just like, you check out, or then your phone buzzes, right? And then you get involved in that. So you got to do things to help you speed up that process so you can get to that result a little bit quicker and avoid all those mental, distractions. So yeah, I would say using a macro program or a Stream Deck is a huge benefit. Even if you use a Wacom tablet, you got 8 buttons on it that you can program with keyboard, commands, and that's
one thing I forgot to mention. But when Paul said JKL, was like popped in my head, was the one thing that I had been trying to do and figure out to get faster was I realized that obviously my fingers are on JKL to rewind, pause, fast forward the most. And I was like, I should probably map every key that I use the most around those keys. So I moved like lift and extract right next to those keys so that I'm not moving my hand and constantly having to find JKL again. And that was huge. I mean, Media Composer has their stock kind of keyboard layout, which is fine. And I think people get used to that. And that's all, it's such muscle memory that like, it's very difficult to unlearn shortcuts that you've used for years. But I promise you that using some of these tools to speed up the way that you can do things will ultimately be worth it. But it is painful to have to unlearn a lot of things that I can't tell you the amount of times when I've been doing, like, I programmed a new key and like all of a sudden Media Composer deletes like half of my sequence and I don't understand why. And I'm like, oh yeah, I did remap that to something totally different. So yeah.
I missed this. See, when we were in an office, editors pop in and out of each other's bays, and then we were like, "Oh, what did you just do there? What key did you press? What is you put that there? Oh my God, that's genius!" And so we don't really get that anymore, all working remotely. But yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, now we got, we're talking about gear. It's gonna be like, a 2-hour, podcast.
We can keep going.
There should be a website where all editors can just share their keyboard shortcuts.
No, I'm all about the keys because I got my gaming mouse right here.
Oh yeah,
and a gaming keyboard too. So I love buttons. Trust me.
That's got like 20. What is that? That has like 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, those are great.
I'm curious about the Stream Deck too. I've been thinking about that.
Totally. Oh, I have another one because I'm a huge nerd. I don't know if you can see this one. I have another one that has the knobs on it. Let me see this one.
Oh, nice.
And This one's actually pretty cool, especially when we're working remote with remote software. You can program these to adjust the volume.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So like we run on Jump Desktop or Splash Top or whatever, and you can adjust globally the volume on that. You can even use it to program certain things. So if you wanted to dial up a slider, let's say, in an effects palette, you can program those knobs so that you can finite step by step go back and forth with it. I don't generally use it for that. I like these more specifically to do the macro. I just hate pushing a ton of buttons, the repetitive, especially like another one I love, if we're going to get dorky, is sometimes you just want to globally change the volume on a whole bin of clips or a whole bin of music. And that's like a 5-step click process and typing in things. So with these, you can just say Command A to select all, and then go to the keyboard, the menu, find out what the next thing is, which is like globally change audio levels, and then manually it'll punch in the number that you want to drop it down by minus 15 or 20 or whatever. And it becomes tedious when you have to do that for every bin. Now you just hit one button and it just does it.
But yeah, with any of those macro programs, it's a strange thing. You kind of have to observe your own editing process and become aware of what things do you do like the most in sequence. And then those are the things that you then end up programming. Yeah. make it, yeah, any of these. So Paul, so that Stream Deck, it's essentially a macro. It's a piece of hardware that has a macro backend to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And if you like colors and cool like icons, you can program each button with its own color or its own text or its own picture, and like you can get really dorky with it and like have this thing light up like a Christmas tree if you want it. You know, it's really fun.
We're not sponsored, by the way.
Yeah, well, no, we have. I was going to say we should get some affiliate links here or something.
Yeah.
Well, no, hey guys, again, thank you for giving us a look at the editing of Vanderpump Rules, and again, congrats on the Emmy nomination.
Thank you. Yeah.
And again, thanks for being here. Great to meet all of you. Thank you to our panelists, Paul, Ramin, Sax, and Jesse, for being here with us today to discuss their incredible work on Vanderpump Rules. Also, thank you to Impact 24 PR for putting this panel together, and to all of you for watching. Be sure to check out the Hollywood Editing Mentor podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast app for the other panels in this series. Again, thank you very much for watching and for listening. I'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.